I work in construction, and I go to different job sites every week or two. This past job site was in middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. Like literally just cornfields and cow pastures. There's a town, if you can call it that. It's really just a grouping of maybe 10 houses on a quarter-mile of road, and a single isolated gas station that was another mile down the road. I was on this job site for 8 days, Monday to Friday, and then Monday to Wednesday the next week. After work every day, I would stop in at the gas station and get gas and a snack. The inside wasn't incredibly old, probably renovated in the past decade or so, and the checkout was on the left when you walked in. It looked like a normal small-town convenience store. The clerk was a younger man who always wore interestingly patterned button-up shirts, bananas, colorful lizards, things like that, and I would always compliment him on his choice that day. The gas station was this way for the first 7 days that I was there. On the last day that I was on the job site, I stopped into the gas station. It looked the same from the outside, but the inside was completely different. The inside was now a bit more run down, and the checkout was now on the right-hand side. The laminate floor tiles were chipped and worn. The countertop was faded. There was now a food warmer advertising that they sold breakfast burritos and bean burritos on Wednesdays. The clerk was an older woman with a gray mullet-type haircut. Not like it was a style choice, but just like she hadn't changed her hair since 1980. I don't think I went back in time or anything crazy like that, because on the counter by the register, there were signs up for the annual 2019 meat shoot. For non-country folk, target shooting competitions where the prize is meat. In any case, I didn't feel out of place or have any weird vibes about it. I was just very confused as to where my cashier friend went, and why the store was suddenly pretty shabby, and other than that sign, kind of stuck in the 80s. It was really, really weird. When I was a teenager, I went to Pennsylvania to visit a friend and his family over the summer. I was about 15 years old at the time, and still to this day I cannot forget the bizarre experience I had. It was a regular night, and I was sleeping in my friend's room when I awoke having to pee. My friend had bunk beds, and I was on the top bunk, so I had to hop down to make my way out of the bedroom and down the hall to the bathroom. I went into the hallway from my friend's room, and because it was very dark, I kept one hand on the hallway as I made my way to the guest room door, which is located on the same side of the hallway as my friend's room. I knew that if I followed the wall to the guest room door, I could go straight across the hallway to the bathroom door, which is exactly what I did. I get into the bathroom, I turn on the light, I go pee, and when I finish, I look at myself for a minute in the mirror before returning to bed. Everything is normal up until this point. This isn't the first time that I've gotten up in their house in the night to use the bathroom, and I have always followed this same routine of following the walls with my hand in the dark. As I leave the bathroom, I do exactly the same thing to get back to my friend's room. I go straight across the hall from the bathroom door to the guest room door, and with one hand on the wall the whole time, I make my way back to my friend's room. This is where things get glitchy. I get to my friend's room, and I enter it. But as I enter it, I'm not in my friend's room. I'm somehow in the office next to it. I realize immediately that this makes no sense, because I had my hand on the wall the whole time, as I had done countless times before. But here I am in the office. The office is not very big. It's a small, square room with a closet next to the hallway door to my right as I enter it. Right away, I can see that there is light coming from inside the closet. So I turn and slide open the door. Inside the closet, there are 4 old TVs, stacked one on top of the other. All of them are playing static. I am completely confused by this, and I have no idea how I even got into the office to begin with, let alone why there are just 4 TVs in the closet playing static. I shake my head in confusion and decide to just go back to bed. I make my way out of the office, back into my friend's room, and although I'm still completely baffled by what just happened, I basically just go back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately thought about what had happened, and I went straight into the office and opened the closet. There's nothing in there except for one jacket hanging on a hanger, right above where the TVs had been. I don't recall telling my friend or his family about this experience, and everyone that I've told since always says, well, obviously it was just a dream, which my logic really wants to agree with, but I know that this was not a dream. I recall every single moment, from jumping out of the top bunk, walking down to the bedroom door, trying not to make a noise, everything. I remember how black the hallway was, the feeling of the wall on my fingers. Every single detail, and everything about it was exactly the way it is in real life, except for the glitch. My grandparents have both passed quite a few years ago, but one of the stories that they told me has stuck with me all these years. Grandma and Grandpa were driving through Pennsylvania to an old family farm. The farm belonged to his uncle and cousins who lived there. Grandpa was a city kid and had visited the farm every summer for years as he was growing up. It had been about 25 years since he'd been, but he loved that farm. And he wanted to introduce Grandma to his cousins and show her around the farm. As they drove closer to the farm, Grandpa began to tell Grandma about the little town that was on the road on the way to the farm. Soon they reached the little town. Grandpa was amazed that it hadn't changed a bit. Toward the end of town, they saw that a hotel was on fire. The road was blocked by firemen using an old-fashioned fire wagon with a water tank pulled by horses. They thought it was strange, but they just chalked it up to being rural Pennsylvania. Eventually, the water wagon moved and they could drive by. They reached the farm, and after greeting Grandpa's uncle and cousins, they shared the news about the fire at the hotel. Grandpa suggested they all go down to see if they could help. The relatives looked shaken. That's when one of the cousins explained that there was no town. Not anymore. About 20 years before, the hotel had burned down, and the fire spread to most of the small town's main street. After their businesses were lost, people left the town. In fact, the uncle and cousins were the last people living in the area. Grandma and Grandpa couldn't believe it. They had just seen the town, the fire, even smelled the smoke. They and some cousins got in the car and drove back to town, going back the way they'd just come. And the town was gone. Just some burnt-out shells of a few buildings remained. Not dear. For my college screenwriting class, we were split into groups, 4 students each, for a group project. The assignment was to select a myth or legend to base a 10 to 15 page screenplay on. My group thought it would be interesting to choose a cryptid for the project rather than a well-known historical myth or legend. Our teacher cleared us for the idea, and we started brainstorming. Of course, we didn't want to do the most well-known cryptids, like the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, so we started looking up some lesser-known ones. One of the ones that somebody pitched was known as the not deer, in some cases the night deer. According to people's stories, it looked almost exactly like a large deer, but something felt horribly off. Only when they drove away did they realize what was specifically wrong about it. Still, even before they understood exactly what was going on, every story mentioned the overwhelming sense of wrongness. Quoting someone else's personal account, quote, "It was a deer in the way that a graveyard is a playground. You can treat it as such, I guess, but it won't feel the same." End quote. Lo and behold, after a bit of research, I found out it was located in North Carolina. Not only that, but it was just over an hour away. Just about every written or publicized story of the knot deer supposedly took place in Boone, North Carolina, and its surrounding areas. I informed the group of what I had discovered, and, being spontaneous as I am, told them I would be driving out to the location that very night. I figured I probably wouldn't come across anything, even though I was legitimately curious. At the very least, it was something interesting to do, and I'd be able to accurately describe the location and ambience of the area to the main screenwriter. I wasn't able to convince the other 3 members of my group to go with me. They all had their legitimate reasons, and since I made the decision to go so suddenly, I understood why none of them wanted to go with me on the trip. Still, I had nothing else to do that night, and I had been itching for more travel ever since the entire pandemic started. I filled my roommate in on everything and asked if he wanted to go with me. At first, he told me that he would just consider it, but as I was getting ready to go, he told me that he had decided to tag along. One of his main reasons for doing so was that he felt like he had to go with me. I shrugged it off, not thinking much of what he said. After filling up my car with some extra gas and buying a couple of snacks for the road, I plugged Boone, North Carolina into my GPS, and I headed out. My roommate and I were pretty relaxed for the majority of the ride there. We joked around, listened to all sorts of music through the radio and CD player, and had some of whatever snacks we had bought earlier. Eventually, we got close to Boone. That's when we started to feel like something was off. It wasn't a feeling strong enough to make us want to turn around, but it was worth mentioning to each other. When we got into the city, it was just about what we imagined. Gas stations, car dealerships, dollar stores, and small cafes. All of them were closed at the time, with our arrival in Boone being at around 9:10 p.m., but all of them were well lit and unintimidating. My roommate told me that we should probably head back at about 9:30, and that he would let me know when that time came around. I agreed with him since I didn't want to spend too long searching for an experience. Needless to say, when we didn't come across anything by 9:30, he decided to let us keep going for another half hour. The clock in my car's dash had been broken for a while now, and I couldn't look at my phone while I was driving, so I was totally reliant on him for the time. Had I known that we were going to be driving in the area past 9:30, I probably would have mentioned it and turned around sooner. Had I done that, I would have completely missed the experience we ended up having. I'm still unsure whether or not that would have been a good thing. We ended up in Tennessee by 9:50. That's when things started to get really bad. At this point, we rarely came across any other cars on the highway. We took the first exit we saw and ended up driving along more mountainous, forested roads. This meant that there were lots of tall, dark trees, almost no streetlights, and twisting roads that forced you to slow down. My roommate said he started to feel bad about the whole situation, and I agreed wholeheartedly. Still, there was nowhere to turn, so we continued going straight, since that was really the only option for the time being. A few different times, we got a serious sense of dread, but usually that feeling disappeared by the time we got onto the next section of the road. There were a couple of times that the both of us had started to tear up, not because we were sad or upset, but because it felt so wrong to be there, like it was somewhere we were not supposed to be. The feeling of dread was very particular too. It wasn't feeling bad in the sense of depression or anxiety. The best way to describe it is just that sense of wrongness. It came in waves, not sticking around for a long time, but not going away entirely either. By this point, my GPS had stopped working entirely. Both my roommate's phone and my phone said that they had full bars, but mine simply refused to connect to anything. Luckily, his GPS still worked fine, so he plugged in the directions for home. It continued taking us down that road for a while longer. The area started to become much more forested as we went on, and the road started to twist and turn much more than it had before. Basically, we had come across the exact area where you would expect a monster to be. We started to feel really, really bad. I don't think I can express the feeling well enough with words, but it was the worst we had felt so far. But we knew something wasn't right. We both felt like we just weren't supposed to be there, and we felt like we had to get out. Since my roommate started getting truly spooked, that put me on edge even more, since he never gets scared by anything. There wasn't much we could do about it, though. The GPS still wanted us to follow the road, so we both awaited its next directions, eager to get on the highway back home. The sense of dread still came and went with every other segment of road that we crossed. Eventually, the GPS wanted us to turn. My roommate told me to turn right on that road. I knew he meant to turn right onto the road and follow it straight ahead, but for some reason I figured we should just turn around and backtrack. I started slowing down, and we both started to feel the absolute worst we'd ever felt. Like things are very wrong and something was about to happen. My roommate said that my eyes were glazed over, and I kept saying something along the lines of, "I just need to turn around right here," over and over. The more I said it, the quieter I got, until it was just, "I just need to turn around right here." Keep in mind that I am normally a fairly loud person, and I had been loud the entire drive up until this point. I pulled off onto a gravel dip on the side of the road. Along the gravel dip was a thin chicken wire fence, shiny and silver. Back on the road behind us was a wall of dirt and rock. We were surrounded by tall, dark trees that blocked most of the night sky. Even with the headlights on, it was very difficult to see far ahead. He said very forcefully that we couldn't stop and we needed to keep going because he felt really bad, but I wasn't listening to him. I wasn't quite processing what he was saying, and for some reason I was having a difficult time hearing him at all. After he realized he wasn't getting through to me, he broke into a literal shout and told me that we had to get out of there. We could not stop, and we could not go back that way. It took him using his road rage voice to snap me out of it and get me to speed down the road. The only word I can use to describe what I felt in that moment was absolute terror. Even as I was slowing down, I felt it get worse and worse until it was almost overwhelming. I only realized that after we had gotten out of the area and back onto the highway. As we passed through the area and started getting into the city again, the looming sense of dread started to fade away. By the time we got onto the main highway, we felt safe again. But in the moment that I pulled off onto the gravel dip on the road, where I had almost stopped the car entirely, that was the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. I would bet my life savings that had we turned around, we would have seen something that we never wanted to. Both of us admitted to tearing up as we drove off from that spot. I was much more shaken up than my roommate was, and it took me a little while to fully process what had actually happened. I think it's safe to say that even though I didn't explicitly see anything for myself, I found exactly what I was looking for. I live outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we went on a family vacation to Hershey, Pennsylvania, which was roughly 200 miles away, taking just under a 3.5-hour trip. One morning, while I was at the hotel, I decided to take a shower. As usual, I took off my wedding ring and left it on the counter next to the sink. However, this time, in my rush and excitement to get going, I forgot to put it back on after finishing up. It wasn't until I got in the car that I realized I wasn't wearing it. I quickly ran back inside the hotel room and searched every inch of the bathroom, my suitcase, and turned every article of clothing I had worn that week inside out. But the ring was nowhere to be found. Feeling a bit desperate, I decided to leave a description of the ring at the front desk, hoping that the cleaning crew might find it. I tried to reassure them that it really wasn't worth stealing. It was just a simple 14-karat white gold ring with no engravings or anything like that. In fact, I even joked that it might be mistaken for a washer or a nut, understanding if they ended up throwing it out. Despite my best efforts and one last deep dive into everything in that room that night, I had almost given up hope of finding the ring. My wife wasn't too upset, considering I had recently lost some weight, causing the ring to constantly slide off my finger. I had experienced miraculous recoveries of the ring in the past, like finding it while cutting the grass or shoveling snow, even in public pools and bars, places where it should have been lost forever. So she had suggested that I get it resized anyway, but eventually we decided to just replace it entirely. Fast forward 3 years and I was doing some spring cleaning in my house. At one point, I took all the cushions off the couch and flipped it upside down to get rid of the crumbs left by my kids. When I picked up the couch again, to my astonishment, there sat my old wedding ring, right in the middle of the floor. I verified that it was indeed the same ring I had lost years ago, now too big for my finger. Strangely, it looked exactly like the new one that I had bought from the same jeweler, who still had my records and matched it perfectly in a smaller size. The most puzzling part was how, after 3 years, the ring had seemingly teleported from that hotel to my couch, a couch that I had thoroughly cleaned several times during that time span. I still don't know how it got back to me, but it has become a cherished keepsake, with a cool story to go along with it. I am not new to the paranormal, and strange things happen to me from time to time. I'm an empath, so I think that makes me more open than most. My earliest experience that I can remember took place when I was about 10 years old. A bit of backstory. When I was 8 years old, we moved from Cheshire, England to Secunda in South Africa. It was during the time of apartheid in South Africa in the early 80s. The way of life there was very different to what I had grown up with in rural England. My dad had always wanted to live in the sunshine, and he landed a job at Sasol. The company he was working for in Cheshire was laying people off at an ever-increasing pace, as were many other local factories, and I think he was worried about being next. We had been living in Secunda for 2 years when we moved to Van Niekerk Street, a lovely big house that my mother fell in love with. It was the first house we had owned since moving to South Africa. So we packed our meager belongings collected over the last 2 years and moved from the smaller house Sasol had provided us closer to the center of town. We had a lovely lady who was our nanny and maid named Julie. She had started to work for us about 2 weeks after we arrived in South Africa, and she stayed with us for many years. In those days, it was normal to have help in the house. The houses even came with small bedrooms and a toilet in the back garden, known as a kaya. These rooms were not connected to the main house, so the worker could come and go and have privacy. Many of the local house workers lived in the more rural areas, so they lived in town during the week. Julie moved with us to the new house. She was also thrilled at the move, as her room at the new house was bigger and had a bath with a shower. Julie at this point had worked for us for a few years and took care of myself and my little sister while my mother worked full-time at a local hotel. Julie was Zulu. The Zulu tribe are a very superstitious people, and to this day make use of a sangoma, or a witch doctor to cure illnesses and curse people, paying the sangoma for the privilege. Julie used to tell my sister and I about the bad spirits she believed in, and the stories of the Tokoloshi, the evil dwarf devil that used to climb onto young women's beds and have his way with them, making them have kids and then leaving them to raise the spawn. Lovely. To prevent herself from becoming a victim to this creature, she had her bed up on bricks so that he couldn't climb onto it. Most young women of childbearing age did this, at least if they believed in this thing. One morning, she walked into the kitchen looking very shaken. My mother sat her down and gave her a mug of sweet tea and asked her what was wrong. She blurted out that she had had no sleep that night and that evil spirits were haunting this house. My mother pressed her, and once she had calmed down, she told my mother the story. The previous night, before bed, she was writing a letter to her family by candlelight. Julie always had candles burning, and my mother was very conscious that one day she would burn down the kaya. While she was writing, her candle went out. She assumed it was a breeze, so she got up and put a spare blanket across the bottom of the door. The kaya did not have any windows, and it was made of solid breeze block. So the crack under the door would be the only source for the breeze. She decided to leave the big light on to finish her letter. It was then that she was startled by the flushing of the toilet. It just flushed all by itself. She didn't dare go into the bathroom, but apparently the toilet flushed at least twice an hour all night until about 6 a.m. when it finally stopped. My mother said she would call a plumber to look at the toilet, told Julie to take the day off and just sleep. Julie went off to the neighbor's maid's kaya, as she did not want to go back to sleep in her own bed. My mother had an emergency plumber out later that day, who said there was absolutely nothing wrong with the toilet. He said he had no clue how it was even possible that it had flushed by itself. Over the next few days, Julie calmed down enough to move back to her room. The toilet still flushed, and now and then the taps on the bath would turn on by themselves. My mother told Julie that it was probably a plumbing issue, and that it wasn't an ancestor or an angry or evil spirit. All was calm until Julie woke up one morning to find her room wrecked. Her clothes were scattered around, ornaments broken. She had slept through all of it. At first, she suspected her room had been broken into while she slept. But when she went to the door, it was still locked and bolted from the inside. Julie refused to stay there after that and moved a few things into her friend's kaya next door. About a week later, a large crack appeared in the wall of the main house. My father was concerned that the house would fall on us with the speed that it appeared, and called the surveyor to come out and take a look. He determined that the foundations of the house were faulty and that they needed to be stabilized. Basically, a trench was to be dug all the way around the house, and concrete poured in to reinforce the house. The work was urgent, so it started the following week. This was when things started to happen in the main house. Shoes would go missing and appear outside, in a trench, as would keys. The fridge blew up, followed closely by the washing machine. Our 2 dogs would bark at thin air, the hairs on their backs up. The toilet in the main house started flushing by itself too. It was then that my dad joked that we had a ghost with the runs. We heard voices in the garden and would go outside and see nothing. As the trenches were dug deeper, the reason for all the problems came to light. Out of the holes, the workers hauled broken bits of headstone and human bones. In fear, the workers refused to dig more and left the site. The headstones that were pulled up were shiny, smashed, large pieces of marble, not pitted as you would expect them to look, having been underground for a while. I personally don't remember there being any writing on them. I remember thinking that they would have been great for tap dancing on, until my mother caught me and told me off. The police were called, and our house was officially declared a crime scene. The bones were taken away to be tested. The local press heard about the story, and it made the front page of the local paper. My sister and I, posing with a large piece of the gravestone near the trenches, graced the covers. The police sent a team to dig up the rest of the garden and locate all that they could. My mother told me that they found pieces of several skeletons. About a month later, we were given the all-clear to fill in the foundation trenches, and all the gravestones and all of the bones were taken away by the council. The local police chief told us that Secunda was built over 3 farms. It was built by the factory for the employees. In those days, farms had family burial plots on them, and the generations of the families who ran the farm were buried there. When the farms were purchased, they apparently collected up all the graves and buried them in one hole. Our house was built on top of it. The police assured us that the remains they collected were relocated to consecrated ground and buried with respect, and that headstones stating the family names of the original owners of the farms would be put there. After that, the strange happenings stopped. I hope those souls found rest in the end. We stayed in the house another year after that, but Julie never did come back to the house. Instead, she left and started her own business with the help of my mother. When we moved, she came back to live with us again, her bed still on bricks. This happened on June 29th of this year, outside the main city of Pittsburgh. My partner and I went to the city for an event, and had driven 5 hours to get there. We were cheap, so we took a hotel about 20 minutes away from the main city, in a busy, bustling shopping district. There was a Walmart, IKEA, lots of food places, stuff like that. It was very big and busy, even for nighttime. This was about midnight. We went to the hotel for a bit, and then went to go somewhere else, but we needed to go to the gas station first. I looked one up on Google Maps on my partner's phone. Awesome, 2 24-hour stations right off the road where we needed to travel. So we turn in, go up a short curved road, and pulled into this little spot where the stations were supposed to be. You can't see them from the road, but they were atop a small hill overlooking it. We started to unbuckle, and then my partner noticed that both places were closed. Not just the store part. The entirety of both stations were completely dark, including pumps, lights, except one streetlight, which weirdly made everything bluish, and this little diner nearby too. These were 24-hour pumps. We checked after, as it was still on the phone screen. In addition, the whole thing just felt weird. Like, it legitimately felt as if we weren't supposed to be there. We kind of just sat in awe, looking around for a moment, then drove out as quickly as possible and went to a different place that was normal. Nothing freaky followed us, thankfully. We had a great time at the event and forgot about this weirdness every time we drove. If we go back next year, though, I'm gonna try to find the place again. Maybe there was something wrong with the wires for just those 3 buildings. Maybe there was something else that needed both of them to shut down completely. But the fact that it showed up on Google Maps with the day's average prices, as well as 24 hours open, and when we got there it felt like we drove straight into the Twilight Zone, it was all just really weird. So this story might be a bit long, but it sure was a fun one. For me personally anyway, as I rather enjoy these kinds of things. I come from a very religious family, and a lot of us have had paranormal encounters. My grandmother's house was haunted by someone who apparently hung themselves in the backyard many years before they even built the house. To this day, they frequently have priests come in and bless every room in the house. So many of my family members have been able to see things that the regular eye cannot, including me from a young age, when I used to see things in my house, which once even drove me to run into a locked door hard enough to get a concussion. That's another story for another day. Anyway, this story takes place around late October of last year. I'm a student at Stellenbosch University in South Africa, so most of my friends lived in their own flats around campus. And my one friend, Bianca, had lived in a small one-person flat that was really quiet and small. Basically a long hallway of a room leading onto a balcony. So we all used to hang out in her room while listening to music, playing Uno, drinking beer, and getting really stoned until early in the morning, as all good students do. We had this game that we called the Universe Game, where you basically just ask the universe a question, and she had this mega playlist of songs, so she would put it on ultimate shuffle, and whatever song would play after the question would be the universe's answer, whatever interpretation you took from it and worked for you. So there had been a couple of nights where we'd been hanging out, and the lights would just start to flicker in weird beats. Now, my friends didn't know at the time that I could feel these kinds of things coming, before and as they happened. So they just dismissed it as the switch just freaking out a little bit. But this kept on happening more and more each day, until one night, we were all playing the game again, and when the answer came, the lights acted up again. This time we looked over to the light switch and saw a faded white hand at the switch. Just the hand, flicking the switch. It just disappeared and the lights went back to normal. At this point, everyone was freaking out, but I was really just kind of excited by it. For some reason, it just didn't feel like a threatening presence. It was oddly playful to me. I kept this to myself and just played along with everyone else's reactions. So, one night a few weeks after that, my friends were all out of town, and I had a key to my friend's place. I decided I would go over there and stay for a few nights, just to hang out and draw on my favorite couch. It all went smoothly, and I was actually getting some nice work done. I had been playing the universe game a lot throughout this time, and this one night, close to 3 a.m., I was drawing and playing the game. I decided to go onto YouTube to find a random playlist to mix things up, because, I don't know, I'm a rebel like that. So I find one. I ask a couple of questions and things go smoothly, and as I'm drawing, I suddenly just get a weird surge of energy through me, and at the same time the lights start going bananas. I look down at my phone, and the song playing is called Ghost. I had not smoked nearly enough to make that up, or to see that. Anyway, I jumped up and looked around to see whatever was going on, but as usual, it ended as soon as it started. I must say that this was one of the more pleasant experiences I had ever had in this line of things, and I'm not even getting into my sleep paralysis and night terrors. I've experienced a lot of strange things, but like I said, this one was actually pretty cool, and I thought I would share. Entities in the house. I lived in the house where all of this took place from the ages of 9 to 23. My parents got divorced when I was 14. I lived with my parents, younger brother, and grandma. My younger brother was the first to notice something strange in the house. One night in 2005, he woke us up at about 11 p.m., crying, saying that there was someone outside his window. Living in South Africa, such things are possible, so my dad went to inspect and found nothing. A few weeks later, my aunt, my mom's sister, came to visit from out of town and was sleeping in my grandma's room. She relayed to us the next morning that she was awoken by the door opening and a figure staring at her from around the corner. Fast forward a few years to 2007 and 2008. I would normally stay alone at home whenever my dad would go out fishing with my brother for the weekend. This is when I started noticing odd things happening. Keys would go missing. Lights would be on after I know I had switched them off. Small things, but significant enough for me to take note. 2010 is when things got real. I was in my last year of high school and working part-time for my dad, who has an office on the same property as the house. I was working on a file, left it on the desk, and went to lunch, and when I returned, the file was gone. No one else could have taken it, as the only other staff member was the receptionist. About a week later, we found the file one morning just laying in the middle of the floor. That weekend, a friend of mine stayed over in my brother's room, and we came home from a party. It must have been about 1 or 2 in the morning when we got to bed. I was already falling asleep, when I heard him scream for me. My room and my brother's room share a bathroom with doors on each side. I get to my friend, who is literally sweating, and I asked him what happened. He said somebody started to choke him as soon as he closed his eyes to sleep, but nobody visible was there. From that day, I would be seeing the man, as we named him, around the property. I've seen him while working on my car in the garage. I've seen him while doing dishes. My father has even seen him while sitting in the garden. I never see his face, but he's always wearing blue overalls, like the ones construction workers wear. It wasn't serious until I got married and had a kid. This takes us to October of 2019. My son is a year and a half old, and he refuses to be in this house. He cries constantly whenever we visit my dad, and as soon as we leave, he's perfectly well behaved. 2 weekends ago, my dad had gone out fishing. My brother wasn't around. I had to come feed the cats and switch on the lights. I came in at about 7 p.m. that Saturday night, and as soon as I walked into the house, I felt a chill. Thinking nothing about it, I carried on with what I had to do. While in the kitchen, I heard heavy footsteps in the lounge and the breaking of glass. I rushed to investigate, and I found a vase that's normally on the cabinet about 5 meters away, on the floor, in pieces. I locked up and got out of there. I told my wife the story when I got home, and she suggested that I burn frankincense around the house and read some prayers. Sunday morning, I set out on my mission, and I started burning frankincense and praying around the house. When I got to the office, I had just begun to pray when the glass sliding door shattered. Since then, my son hasn't been fussing when he comes here, and the atmosphere seems a lot lighter around the house. My tale unfolds on the big island of Hawaii when I was around 10 or 11 years old. My father was an avid hunter of wild boars and sheep, and occasionally he would take our family to a remote cabin that my uncles had constructed. The exact location of the cabin is hard to pinpoint, but it was an hour's off-road drive up the mountain from an obscure road that branched off the main highway. This quaint one-story cabin's front door was a sliding glass door. Across from it, you could see 3 rooms, each furnished with 2 bunk beds, but no doors for privacy. The cabin's bathroom was a primitive outhouse, lacking light and running water, nestled within a clutch of trees and bushes. Despite the cabin's lack of amenities and poor ventilation, which made it quite chilly, the place had a certain charm. However, I couldn't shake off the sensation of spiritual presence, perhaps due to my uncle's story of an enormous battle that had taken place in the vicinity during ancient times. This immediately made me think of night marchers, which, although just a part of Hawaiian folklore, for some people, are perceived as extremely real entities by Native Hawaiians. During this trip, my cousin, sister, and I found ourselves exploring the expanse around the cabin, an open field laden with grass, weeds, and bordering trees, growing over lava rocks. Out of boredom, we picked up some hammers and started breaking into small lava tubes, hoping to discover something interesting. These tubes weren't massive like caves, but small pockets that had formed due to air bubbles trapped in the flowing and later hardened lava. You could identify them by merely tapping your shoe on the surface and listening to the sound. Much to our surprise, one such lava tube did contain something, a pile of bones, cushioned by long brown bird feathers. These bones, which didn't appear to belong to a human, but rather some animal, perhaps a chicken, were strikingly well preserved and still bore hints of pinkish red color, suggesting freshness. We were puzzled. How did these bones get inside the tube? Why weren't they destroyed by the lava? The only plausible explanation we could think of was that these bones were an offering to Pele, the fire goddess, given that the volcano hadn't been active for centuries. Out of respect, we quickly sealed the tube's opening with rocks and retreated, choosing not to mention this to our parents. The following morning, our father asked us if any of us had visited the outhouse early in the day. When we all denied it, he shared that he had seen a large figure standing at the sliding door, presumably having returned from the outhouse. Unable to discern the figure in the darkness, he dismissed it as a dream. However, the possibility that it might have been the entity whose offering we had disturbed terrified me. The figure could have been a human, but considering the cabin's remote location, it seemed very unlikely. Regardless, after that unnerving encounter, I never stayed at that cabin again. For the past 2 weeks, my family and I have been traveling around various countries in Europe. Unfortunately, we had our passports stolen in Belgium and had to make a couple last-minute changes to our plans, one of which included booking a hotel in a new city for one night. We stopped just for the night between trains in Cologne, Germany. I helped my parents find the last-minute reservation online, and it was a pretty standard apartment-style rental. When we arrived at the rental, we were all impressed by the views of the nearby cathedral and church spires, the shingled roofs, just the general feel of history that the whole town had. We went out for dinner and came back after dark, all heading to bed for our early train the next morning. I shared a room with my little brother, and my parents slept in the next room over. I remember asking them if we could swap rooms, because I didn't like the layout of ours. There were way too many doors for me to feel comfortable. I have a weird thing where I don't like sleeping near doors, and I can't sleep in a room with any doors left open. Anyway, they said no, we could just stay in the original room, which had doors to the kitchen, hallway, and 2 closets. I was too tired to push it, and I figured my fatigue would override my personal habits, so I just got ready for bed and tried to go to sleep. While I was sleeping, I remember having some cycles of regular dreams. Then all of a sudden, I woke up within another dream. I was lying in the same bed, in the exact same room, and my little brother was lying in the same bed too. It felt exactly as though I had just woken up normally. Now, I have very vivid dreams sometimes, but I've never dreamed about being in the exact room I'm in, and I've never woken up to a dream within a dream. In this dream, I was sitting up in bed, and so was my brother. I could feel that for some reason we were both very scared, and there was this charged and anxious feeling in the room. I remember my little brother saying, "What is that? Get out your flashlight." At the same time, we were both looking at the far end of the room, where it was darker and away from the windows. It was like we were both almost too scared to speak, but I could feel that we were both sensing whatever dark energy was at the end of the room. I started to fumble for my phone flashlight, just for some light, when all of a sudden this thing, the closest I can describe it as is a dark blob of energy, moved super quickly over next to my side of the bed. My brother and I screamed at the same time as this thing rushed up next to me. That's exactly when I woke up for real, at about 2:30 in the morning. My heart was racing, and I was sweating so hard, despite the room not being hot at all. I was so unsettled that I turned on all the lights in the room, and I didn't sleep for about 2 more hours, until I could finally somewhat relax, and drifted back to sleep finally. This experience was very disturbing for me. I never wake up early in the morning for no reason, as I usually sleep through the night, and I rarely, if ever, have nightmares. Like I said, I have vivid dreams, but they're usually not bad. I'm wondering if anybody has ever had a phenomenon like this, or if you know what it's called. Can people have paranormal encounters in their sleep while in certain spaces? Was I just having a really vivid nightmare? Or was that experience a signal that something bad was in that room? For context, I live in Germany. My boyfriend's childhood home is old. How old, nobody knows exactly. It might have been built around the beginning of the 20th century, but it could be older. It's a 3-level house with a huge archway at the first floor that marks its age. There are 2 stories I want to tell you. The first one happened when we had just started dating. My boyfriend had searched for his room key for quite a while. It appeared to be lost forever. One day I entered his room, and there was the key, laying perfectly placed in the middle of the bed. When he came home from work, I mentioned that I was glad he had found his key. He looked at me confused, and I pointed at the door, where I put the key in. He said, "I never found it." Later, we asked his parents and sister if they had placed it there, but they denied it. To this day, we don't know how it ended up there. The second story happened pretty recently. The building has 2 front doors. The inner front door squeaks remarkably if you open it, so everyone knows when somebody's coming inside. My boyfriend's mother and I sat at the dinner table. His dad was watching soccer on the TV next to us on the 3rd floor. My boyfriend and his sister were out of the house. Suddenly, my mother-in-law and I heard the front door. Then another door-like sound. "Oh, someone must have come in," my mother-in-law said. She went down the first stair and said, "Hello?" No answer. She decided to take a look herself. Not a single soul in sight. At the exact moment she went down to look, my boyfriend opened the door and came in, just to see the 2 of us confused. We asked if he was mocking us. He affirmed that he hadn't even been inside before, so the door wasn't him. He and his mom both told me that these kinds of things have happened to them before. Doors open, things move, sometimes you hear steps that aren't supposed to be there. Apparently, they call their ghost Herbert, after their uncle that passed away a few years ago. I guess it's a friendly soul. Today, I went to the same place I've been twice before. I mean exactly the same place, identical in every way. The thing is, every time I've been there, it's in a different state. The first time I was in Alabama, off Highway 10, between the state line and Mobile in 2012. The second time was off Highway 55 in Mississippi, north of Batesville in 2015. This time it was in Tennessee, off Highway 65 near Spring Hill. I have moved around a bit, and I've definitely gotten a sense of déjà vu before, but that's not what this was. I mean, this place is the same in every single way. The same long, curving exit off of 3 different highways, a left turn at a desolate 3-way stop, leading to a small single-story building on the right side of the road. The building doesn't look that old. Definitely a newer construction, but there's nothing really else around it other than trees and farmland. The lobby is the same. The furniture and its layout are the same. When brought back to an office, it feels like it wasn't really meant to be an office because there are 3 doors. The one we enter through, and then 2 behind me leading to other parts of the building that I can't really see much of. Maybe a copy room and a break room or something. On the desk, there's the same pink stapler on the corner, the same garbage can that looks out of place along the wall between the 2 doors. The only thing that's ever different are the people. The first time in Alabama, it was a staffing company that I was interviewing with. It stood out because it felt so out of place. I had never been in that area before. I was 100% sure I was lost and about to be the main character of a true crime show. The second time, in Mississippi, it was an occupational therapist that I was sent to see because of a work-related disability. It felt very eerie, but I chalked up all the similarities to coincidence. I mean, how else do you rationalize that? Today was the 3rd time, in Tennessee, and it was a legal office. I had an appointment with a lawyer for a consultation over some financial matters. As soon as I walked in the door, I was ready to leave. This was no longer just a coincidence. I knew I had been there before. For the third time, everything was exactly the same. Only the people were different. I have never been more uncomfortable in my life. The whole thing felt wrong in every way. I got the meeting over with as soon as possible, and I will never go back there again. But who knows when I might walk into that building once more. Just somewhere else. Has anyone ever experienced this? Is it some kind of a glitch? I'd really love some answers. Although I've always held an interest in the paranormal, I've remained largely skeptical, favoring evidence-based explanations. I enjoy watching ghost hunting videos on YouTube and browsing through paranormal-themed subreddits. I have visited many supposedly haunted locations in the United States, such as the Omni Parker House in Boston, the Molly Brown House in Denver, the Whaley House in San Diego, Alcatraz at night, and the Winchester House on multiple occasions. Despite all this, I have never encountered any tangible evidence, leaving me to oscillate between curiosity and skepticism. That was until a few months ago. I had arranged a surprise party and weekend getaway for my girlfriend's 30th birthday. She wanted to go skiing, and so I organized the trip well in advance, inviting some of her closest friends. We ended up staying in a large Airbnb cabin in Tahoe, California, nestled amidst numerous similar cabins. It had enough rooms to accommodate all of us, a basement level with 2 beds, a room on the first floor, and 3 rooms upstairs. As it was her birthday, my girlfriend and I took the master bedroom upstairs. On the first night, we celebrated with drinks and games. Balloons that we'd set up in the living room kept popping at strange intervals. Someone suggested it was the heater vents causing the pops, but I was doubtful. Yet, I didn't want to stir up any unease, so I simply observed. Later that night, we could still hear balloons popping downstairs intermittently between 2 and 3:30 in the morning. On the second night, after a day out in the snow, the strange occurrences intensified. As we were all quite tired, we decided to call it a night earlier than before. It was then that I had my first eerie experience. It was so cold, so I went downstairs to adjust the thermostat. As I walked down the dark stairwell, I heard the floor creaking behind me, like someone was following me. The noises continued until I reached the thermostat, then stopped abruptly. I felt watched and called out to who I thought was my friend. Turning around, I found no one there. I was a bit unnerved, but kept it to myself and returned upstairs. About half an hour later, I decided to crank up the thermostat again. As I went downstairs, the only creaks I heard this time were from my own steps. However, as I was adjusting the thermostat, I heard the ball from the foosball table nearby roll across its surface and hit the side wall. Startled and unable to explain the phenomenon, I hurriedly returned to bed. On our drive back home the following morning, the topic of the popping balloons came up. Seeing an opportunity, I shared my experiences. As I finished, my girlfriend's friend, who had been staying across the hall from us, turned pale. She revealed that the previous night she'd seen a shadowy figure at the foot of her bed. Upon waking her boyfriend, the figure had vanished. My girlfriend's cousin, who stayed in the next room, then admitted that she'd heard what sounded like breathing in her room. Alone, these incidents could perhaps be rationally explained, but when considered together, it was hard to deny that something unusual had been happening. This experience has turned me from a skeptic into a cautious believer. As for future encounters with the paranormal, I'd prefer if this was my first and last. While cradling my 5-year-old niece on our porch, she looked at me and said, "When I was grown up and you were just a baby, I accidentally let you fall off a deck and you didn't survive. But that wasn't all. She told my girlfriend that I wouldn't return from work because I was no longer alive. At the tender age of 3, she had astonishingly recited the birth dates of about 30 people that my girlfriend is acquainted with, even though she'd hardly met these people in her short life. Her peculiar nature is undeniable, and as much as we love her, she's always creeped us out just a little. Up until the point of 2008, I wasn't okay with the supernatural, nor did I put much stock into it. I was already socially awkward enough as it was. And I was stuck in that awful teenage phase of not like other girls, but I also didn't think that I was special enough to see ghosts, an idea that I would come to regret. I'd really be okay now if I never saw one again. For more context, after we had moved into this house during the summer of '07, my parents noted that I had undergone a significant personality change. I was suddenly nasty, aggressive, abusive to people who had never harmed me before, even to my friends. Previously, I was just a goofy kid that teachers didn't quite know how to talk to, but I was otherwise considered very bright and pleasant to be around. I was no stranger to moving every other year, and this move had barely bothered me, so they knew I wasn't just upset. It was late one night, my dad was away for work, and it was just me, my mother, my little brother, and my dog that week. For some reason, I couldn't help but feel like something was watching me. I sat up in bed to see a dark figure standing in the corner of my room, almost indiscernible at first glance. I didn't yell, I didn't panic at first, because I thought that I had to be dreaming. I wasn't special, and non-special people don't do cool things like see ghosts. I tried to fall back asleep, but it was pretty tricky, and I felt like I was being watched for the rest of the night. The next day, I asked to sleep in another room, slightly more fearful now, but thinking I just needed a change of pace. It was a fluke, and by sleeping elsewhere, my brain would reset, and I would be fine. I had not just seen a ghost. My mother thought that I was acting up for attention, but figured it wasn't the hill to die on and let me sleep elsewhere. So I did. That thing followed me. It waited at the foot of my bed all night, staring me down as I tried to sleep. I was so exhausted from the lack of sleep the previous night that I did manage to drift off, but it was a restless sleep. I tried to envision myself surrounded by white light, like the Tolkien elves, hoping that it might repel the darkness. The third day, I was sat at the table with a few friends and their mothers and my own family. We had just had dinner and were doling out the cinnamon rolls when I suddenly felt my whole body get heavy, like somebody had just added a 50-pound weight to my skull. I couldn't stop it. I slumped forward in my chair, despite my grabbing at the back of it to stay upright. My eyes just about rolled into the back of my head. Someone asked me if I was okay. I couldn't see. I couldn't see, and yet I could. I suddenly saw a flat plain stretched out before me, and everything was gray. The dark figure stood right in front of me. And then it rushed me. It ran at me so fast I didn't know what to do. I couldn't do anything. I had to fight to pry my jaws apart, and I screamed. It was like the screaming released me, and I about knocked my chair into the wall. I shot back so hard. I was sobbing, and I could hardly catch my breath, while everyone tried to figure out what was wrong. I told my mother what I saw, that the thing was back and that it tried to hurt me. I think this finally convinced her that I wasn't crazy, that something was wrong and I wasn't just trying to get attention. I wasn't a crier. I hated being caught crying. After I was calmed down, she took her 2 friends upstairs with her to my room. She didn't tell me until several years later that her friends had seen it, had seen this dark presence in my room, could prove that I wasn't lying, that I wasn't crazy. The dog often followed her around the house while she was doing chores, but he refused to go anywhere near my room. He actually growled at my room, hackles raised kind of a growl. Even after we moved to a new house, my dog never wanted to stay long in my room again. I don't know if it was because he remembered the bad thing from before, or if something had been irreparably broken in me, or was now a part of me. I couldn't walk into churches anymore without having sudden, unexplainable breakdowns. I would feel like hands were choking me. I would struggle to breathe. I would feel 100 emotions at once and start sobbing. Needless to say, I quit entering churches after more than a few bad experiences. We found a journal in my room a few months before I moved out for uni, full of crazy ramblings, written by something that said it was a monster, that my parents would unalive me if they discovered I was no longer human, that it would have to hurt my family first to stay alive. I burned it immediately, and I tossed the remnants into the trash can. The scariest part of that was, all of it was in my handwriting, and yet I don't remember writing any of it. My family still wonders to this day what it was. Germany is small, and so many new things got built on top of old things all the time. We lived close to Celtic tombs, had visited old mounds and tall obelisks mounted on them. We lived next to a walled city. Buildings in the village could be dated back several centuries prior, and were still inhabited by people today. Maybe our home was on top of someone's grave. The weirdest coincidence of all was that the people who had lived there before us had developed a reputation of being quite nasty as well. I wonder if they'd always been that way, or if maybe the same thing that happened to me and changed me, changed them too. This was back in 2006. A group of friends and I decided to spend the weekend in Germany to watch some of the World Cup games in the local town squares of Frankfurt. We flew in from the UK. Things go as expected, lots of beer and lots of fun. The evening is getting really late, and we find ourselves struggling to find any more bars open at the time. We end up walking a bit, and we find ourselves at the river. We decide to walk along it to see if we come across any place that's open. It's mostly just trees, grass, and small parks. It was clear that we weren't going to find anywhere here to get a drink. We rounded a corner, and all of a sudden there are these huge tents with music playing, a good amount of people, and beer being served. Great, we hit the jackpot. So we all find a table. It wasn't a waitress-style venue, more like a mini festival vibe, so I offer to go buy drinks at the bar and bring them back. The girl at the bar asks me what I'd like, in German. She realizes that I'm English from my terrible German, and we start chatting in English. After a few exchanges, she says that she wants to introduce me to someone and to follow her behind the bar. So I follow her, and we walk behind the bar and out behind the tent. It's quite a large open space, with no one else there except a group of guys in the back corner of this grassy area. She walks straight toward these guys and introduces me to them with something along the lines of, "Hey, this guy is English too. I think you'll get along." She then turns around and walks back to where we'd come from, leaving me with these guys. I say hello and we start small talking. I can't really remember what about. Where I'm from in England and why I'm in Germany, things like that. Turns out these guys are from the same town as where one of the friends that I'm with is from. I end up chatting with them for what seems like an hour or so, to the point where I completely lost track of time. That's when my friend finds me. I see him walking across the grass from the tent. He says they're about ready to leave and to come on with them. I say sure, but just before we leave, let me introduce you to my new friends, as they're from your town. He says hello and asks where about in the town they live. It turns out they live on the same street as one of my friend's uncles. My friend asks perchance if he knows his uncle, and the guy says, yeah, actually, it's his dad. Now both of these guys realize that they're first cousins. My original friend's dad isn't in his life anymore, and he doesn't ever have any contact with that side of the family, but obviously knows who they are. So it kind of makes sense that these guys have never met each other before, but they know who each other are once they connected the dots. Anyway, they chit-chat a bit, exchange numbers, and they still keep in touch to this day. As we're walking away from the group, my friend asks me why I decided to go up to these guys in particular and strike up a conversation. So I tell him about the girl behind the bar who wanted to introduce us. That's when he looks at me really weirdly and explains that he watched me go to the bar to get drinks. According to him, it looked like I was speaking to nobody, and then I just wandered through to the back area behind the bar. It was fully open so he could see through. And I walked directly over to this group of guys, and then stood there talking for that hour. My friends ended up deciding to leave me to it and just got drinks themselves until they were ready to leave. To this day, my friends do not believe me that there was any girl or third party there. To them, I just walked up to a bar, spoke to no one, and then walked up to a random group of guys in a reasonably busy beer tent away from the main area. And then one of them ended up being my friend's first cousin. Since I was making a big deal about how there was definitely somebody that introduced us, otherwise why would I hone in on a bunch of strangers and start chatting, my friend ended up calling his cousin to ask him exactly what happened. Apparently, I did just walk up to them with no one else there and start chatting. They found it a bit weird, but they just went with it. Now, I don't know if it's a glitch or what, but it's really odd, especially because we're in a different country. If we were in the same town or even anywhere in the UK, it might not have been that weird, and I could have explained it away. But we hadn't bumped into any other British people the entire weekend. Anyway, I've always dwelled on this, and I just refuse to accept that there wasn't somebody who introduced us. I remember it vividly. And I know that being drunk doesn't help me, and it makes me question my version of events too. But I remember this person. I mean, I've gone drinking a lot, and I've never hallucinated before. So, I honestly don't know how to explain it. I was little, like kindergarten starting first grade little. I lived in Germany at the time due to being an army brat. My little sister is 2 years younger than me, so we did everything together. We lived in a 2-story farmhouse style home, and my little sister and I were playing in our room. I don't remember when he came, but we started playing with a boy a little bit older than us. I don't remember ever seeing him, just talking to him and playing games and other kid stuff. It was like he kinda just appeared. My sister and I would later realize that the little farm boy was kind of a jerk, because he would turn off the lights in whatever room we were in, mostly our bedroom, and lock the doors. We would find each other in the dark, scared, but also a little bit annoyed. I remember telling my sister to try to find the light, and I would get the door. They were both next to each other. I couldn't open the door, so I began to bang on it, when my sister, in a panicked voice, said that she couldn't find the light. I was kind of mad scared, and I thought that she was pulling my leg. And she was small, so I was like, "Move over, let me try." I felt around the area where I know the light switch was, but all I found was a wall. Confused, I decided to find the bottom of the wall, use both of my hands, and just slide them all the way up as high as I could. Nothing. I then told my sister to do what I had just done, and I would do the same at the top. But we would do kind of a slow zigzag pattern just in case we weren't going far enough. Our hands eventually grazed each other, and we realized we couldn't find a thing. There was no light switch. So I turned back to the door, and I ordered my little sister to start banging on the door and screaming. We did this for what felt like forever. I was even more confused because Mom should be making dinner right now, and Dad would be getting home soon, or he already was. My other older sisters were never home, so they weren't on my list of rescuers. My little sister and I started to give up, thinking that this was just our life now, in the dark next to the door. We weren't about to go into the abyss behind us. Then, all of a sudden, our mom came to the door, and we shouted that we were stuck. Dad got us out, and my little sister and I were pissed. We thought they were being mean and meant to do that to us. We started saying, "Didn't you hear us? We were shouting and banging on the door." They looked confused and said, "We never heard anything." We told them about the farm boy and that we didn't want to play with him if he kept doing that. We actually played with that boy until we left, and I'm still quite miffed about some of the things that he did. But looking back on it, I don't know. That's one heck of a prank, right? I'm starting to wonder what that boy was really up to, if he was even a little boy at all. East Tennessee is known for its ghost stories, and storytelling in general, as is common in Appalachian culture. The Cherokee felt connected to the region spiritually, and the Europeans that replaced them have too. Just look up the legend of the Wampus Cat sometime. Here's my own set of stories, all in relation to Johnson City, as I am originally from that area. In college, before any of my friend group could drink, we got wild hares and decided to go ghost bustin', as we called it. This usually involved us loading up into a vehicle and cruising through the hollows and hills of East Tennessee. We had done our research, be it on the internet or in local ghost story books, and found quite a few places to explore. The first of which I'll mention is the Exit 27 ramp off of I-26 near Irwin. Legend has it that a group of high schoolers were killed by a driver while coming off the ramp one night, many decades ago, after prom. Now their spirits watch the ramp, pushing vehicles back up the ramp and away from the bisecting road. I can personally attest to this experience. If you go at night, and there usually isn't any other traffic, you can stop your car on the bottom of the ramp and put it in neutral. Doing so will make your car roll back up the ramp. The second place is also near Irwin. It's called Bumpus Cove. From what I can remember, there were several stories about this place, including a Confederate cemetery with ghosts. We could never find it, and the GPS kept taking us to a house. Those poor people. We did, however, find a family cemetery with a paved road around it. Legend had it that if you drove around this cemetery on a full moon 3 times, a ghost jeep would chase you down the mountain. This cemetery was very isolated and near the Cherokee National Forest. I don't think we ever managed to do this on a full moon. We still got scared, though. Since the cemetery sat on a hill, we would see illuminated crosses poking up around the graves. Under a night sky, it's pretty horrifying, even if it's not overtly paranormal. The third story I will share is of the Job Cemetery in downtown Irwin. The cemetery is located in town, but sinks down into a creek and heavily forested area. I believe at the back end there's a large, or once was a large, railroad yard. Well, legend has it that the ghost of a murderous homeless person, who apparently was killed in a brawl in Irwin, haunts the cemetery. We explored the cemetery numerous times, but never saw much once again. It was very creepy and unsettling to go back down into the back of the cemetery. So close, yet so far away from the living world. Another story we found was about an abandoned old house called Gwendolyn's House, which sits off Bristol Highway between Piney Flats and Elizabethton. This house was allegedly haunted, and tales of it can be found, or could be found when we looked years ago, on topics. I don't really know the backstory, but we went to it on several occasions and got scared out of our minds. The house sat on a 1-lane road, possibly called Kuntz Road or something, and was literally falling in. 2 people in our group were brave enough to check it out, but another guy and I stayed in the car. The one in the car with me was a friend who boasted about believing in ration and logic and obviously didn't believe in ghosts. Well, he ended up having a panic attack in the car and swore he was seeing an old lady in the upper story window, rocking in a chair, looking and pointing right at him. I think the most infamous ghost story of East Tennessee is the Sensabaugh Tunnel, which last I checked was closed off to the public. Much information can be found about this online, and people can tell it better than me, so it's worth reading the backstory. The tunnel is haunted by the ghost of a person who abducted and drowned a child in the creek running through the tunnel about 100 years ago. You can hear a baby cry in the tunnel, which we believe strongly we did on numerous occasions. An omen for death, at least in those parts, is a black dog. There was also a legend that we came across of a black dog roaming the highways. Well, one night after visiting the tunnel, we were driving out of the old back road that the tunnel was on, and I almost hit a black dog. This was a narrow, one-lane road, and it sat near the Holston River. The mist was up, and I couldn't see the dog until the last second. Luckily, it didn't get hit. It must have jumped out of the way at the last moment, or simply disappeared into thin air. But either way, East Tennessee is creepy. In a small town in South Africa named Pilgrim's Rest, ghost stories are ever prominent amongst the locals. One school holiday, I went to visit some family who had an old gable house on the outskirts of town. Being gifted with the ability to speak with the dead, I loved going there. I would sit in the fields or near the old railway as they would show me flashbacks of the town's early days. But that holiday, something terrible was shown to me. Terrible to the point that I have never returned to the town. Not because I don't want to, but more because I'm not wanted. See, I discovered a dark secret of that town, and what I saw left a scar. I was out on my usual night walk through the old children's cemetery, which was established during a plague. Most of the graves remained unmarked, but all the years of death say 1886. I loved watching the kids play under the full moon. But then I saw them, the miners. They were walking from a part of the forest that I was told was off limits, but they looked sad. They looked as if they were forgotten. The next day I went into that part of the forest, and eventually after about a 2-hour hike, I found the miners again. Approaching slowly, I made them aware that I could see them, and that's when they told me the story of their gruesome death. Back in those days, witchcraft and curses still scared people, and the founding families had been brainwashed into believing that the reason the plague hit the town so hard was because they were mining on sacred ground. But instead of following the right procedures to stop mining, they just decided to collapse the mine right on top of all 50 miners. They claimed that it was an accident, and then proceeded to leave the miners buried under the rubble and erased from history. My mother married an older man about 9 years ago, whose previous wife had died from cancer several years beforehand. We moved into his home, and I was about 13 years old at the time. I had always felt an odd feeling in this home, as my room was in the basement. Nothing out of the ordinary happened here, besides the odd being watched feeling that I would always experience in that home. My mom had hired my biological father, who I'm close to remodel the downstairs bathroom in my stepdad's home. My dad told me he had several of his tools moved around while he was alone working at the place. My dad finished the job and never returned. Fast forward to when my stepdad, mom, and I moved to Washington State. He and my mother began to have a lot of issues and were arguing frequently. I won't go into it, but I came to learn that my stepfather had a certain type of addiction that led him to having many women in our home that were not his wife, many of whom were professionals in this trade and were younger than his own 30-year-old children. I found this very concerning for a number of reasons, and there are some other details that, like I said, I won't go into. But let's just say it was evident that this guy had some very serious issues. He really gave me the creeps. I told my mother, and she was dismissive of it, but she gave off the vibe that I wasn't telling her anything she didn't already know. I wanted to get away from him and everything he was doing, and he bought a vacation home in western Arizona. I was 18 at the time, and I moved down there and I was living on my own. He had most of his items and furniture from his old home in this house that I was staying at alone in Arizona. A couple of weeks go by, and I'm lying in my bed in my room. I heard footsteps that sounded like somebody wearing slippers, scuffling along the tile floor in the living room. I was totally scared after that, and I couldn't sleep. About a week after this, the hall bathroom shower was having problems, so I used the master bathroom shower. I had an awful feeling that I was being watched in the master bath as well as the master bedroom and the closet. It was such a bad feeling that I no longer went into that bedroom, and I was frightened to even be on that side of the house. When I was done showering, I was near running through the bathroom and bedroom, shutting the door behind me. The same week, I was playing computer games in the office, and the desk was facing the living room. I was sitting in my chair, and I just felt like I was being watched again. I felt something touch my right shoulder. I jumped and looked behind me, but nothing was there. I was pretty spooked, but I sat back down and continued with my game. Then, maybe an hour after feeling something touch my shoulder, while still playing my game, I suddenly heard a very loud slam near the side of the house where the master bedroom is. Maybe 10 to 15 seconds after the slam, I heard several knocks along the wall on the same side of the house. I was frozen in fear. I stood up at my desk, and all I could do was let out a scream. I called my mother hysterical and explained to her what had happened. 2 days later, she drove over 1,000 miles to come get me and take me back home. When I returned home, I found out that she was divorcing my stepdad, sending him to live in the house in Arizona that I had just come from. After he was gone, I didn't experience much in my mom's house, beside that feeling of being watched. I opted to stay upstairs. It was a split-level home with the living room and kitchen upstairs and my bedroom downstairs. I was upstairs in the living room when my mom's dog stood at the top of the stairs, staring downward at the base of the stairs, growling, frozen still. Soon after that, my mother sold the house, and I moved out of state, and I've never experienced anything like that since. I'm still wondering if there are any explanations as to what might have occurred. I believe this might have been paranormal, and I haven't experienced anything like this since, nor had I ever experienced anything until living in the same home that my mom's ex-husband lives in. In the fall of August 2013, I was set to begin my first semester at Arizona State University in Tempe, and I had to attend an orientation in the middle of campus. After making the 30-minute drive earlier than anticipated, my grandma pulled into the parking lot of the First United Methodist Church, where we exchanged conversation for about 15 minutes, just to kill time. There was a gardener in front of us tending the flowers, and only one black sedan parked directly next to us that I hadn't noticed earlier when we pulled in. As we unceremoniously prepared to get out of the car, something caught my grandma's eye in her periphery as she reached for her seatbelt button in the direction of my passenger seat. She quickly gasped, placing her right hand on her chest, as she chuckled and then quipped, "Wow, I thought I saw a ghost." Looking directly at her, without turning as she let out another nervous chuckle, I asked her what she was talking about. The parking lot at this point was dead silent, and the gardener was busy tending the flowers in the building opposite of the Methodist church. Not expecting much, I slowly and nervously turned to my right, where a four-door black sedan was parked to the right of us, only to come in direct eye contact with what seemed to be a woman of Asian heritage with a bob haircut, pinstripe suit business attire, staring at us for no discernible reason. With the dead stare they were giving us, it could be assumed that they had been staring for longer than we had noticed them. What made this individual terrifying was the lack of life in their eyes. I only looked for what felt like 5 seconds, but I could feel that glassy, uncanny valley, lights are on but no one's home look. It's one like a corpse might have before their eyes were closed. The color of this entity's skin was a pale color that I could only associate again with a corpse at the time. Their mouth slowly developed into one of the most unsettling half-smiles I've ever seen, as their dead eyes looked at me and my grandma, unwavering. In this deafening silence, similar to a panic attack or a fight-or-flight feeling, my grandma and I turned back to each other, chuckled uncomfortably, and slowly got out of the car, refusing to look at the terrifying entity or person in the car next to us. While my grandma claims she forgot about this incident, she believes it probably did happen when I bring it up to her. If anyone can help me with identifying this type of entity, or if you've had any experience with something similar, let me know. I know that certain areas of the Tempe campus are haunted. I couldn't find any information on an incident like this, though. I'm a game ranger in South Africa, in Mpumalanga, 80 kilometers away from the nearest town, in the dense bush. I was off duty that night, the night it all happened, and I went to bed early. My room was surrounded by an electric fence, so any harmful animal wouldn't easily get to me, unless it happened to break through the fence. The area around the rooms are usually fairly safe to walk around if you keep your wits about you. I woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning to a pup growling at my window. I had a feeling like I was being watched, so I just stayed still and quiet for about 5 minutes. I couldn't figure out why my pup was growling. Then I heard it. Directly outside my bedroom window were quick, short footsteps and what sounded like children whispering. Thinking it was some of the other staff finishing a shift late and walking past my room or pulling a prank, I told them to shut up. And they did. Or it did. But then the whispers carried on, this time closer to my window. My puppy started whining and growling and trying to climb underneath my duvet. I grabbed my .303 rifle because things in South Africa are unstable with violence, so it's never a bad thing to carry. I mustered up the courage to yell at these jerks playing a prank outside my window. I quickly opened the blinds to catch them off guard. But I didn't see any people or any animals for that matter. But I did see something short, entirely black, and faceless. A figure that immediately ran away at an unnatural pace. Each step was like a 3-meter glide to the next. The hair on my neck stood right up, and tears started to well up. By now, my puppy was aggressively barking at the front glass door to where this thing ran, and started howling. I had no idea what had just happened, and I wasn't about to be a sitting duck. So I went outside with my .303 and searched the immediate area outside my window. There was nothing. No footprints, no dark figure, just nothing. But the next day, I did find random bird feathers bunched up with some twigs with what looked like hair under the tree outside my window. I spoke with one staff member, an African guy who I got along with the most, and I explained what happened. Turns out, the locals that night stayed indoors because they knew it was the night where the witch doctors were calling out demons to do their deeds. This particular one was sent to whisper black tongues outside of my window, whatever that is, for who knows what. Apparently, it's some kind of spell to get me to leave the area. My buddy told me that I was lucky it ran away and didn't attack me when I went outside. I guess what was supposed to happen was that the thing was supposed to light a fire of the feathers and twigs and hair, and that would be their sacrifice kind of thing for their spell. Who knows? And somehow I interrupted it. I never did validate any of this, it was just what I was told. I said, "Thanks for that information, I feel so much better." There's a lot more weird things that happened to me out there, but that one was definitely the scariest. The girl from Catholic school. My story happened in 2013. For some context, I was staying in my grandparents' home, which was over 100 years old, in South Africa. I had experienced other unexplainable occurrences, like waking up one night to have my rosary wrapped around my neck, choking me. This event had left ligature marks around my neck. The strange part is that I had slept in a rosary for years, and I had never had anything like this happen. Other strange things that went on were doors opening on their own, the kind of doors that have handles that require twisting to open. The story I'm telling you today centers around this old house. My grandparents decided to sell it, as they were both in their 70s. In 2013, I was alone at home with our housekeeper as I was studying. The real estate agent showed up to the house unannounced. I opened up for her, and out stepped an older Muslim woman. With this woman were two little girls dressed in uniforms that matched the Catholic primary school I had attended many years prior. The one girl had the same fair complexion as her mother. The other girl was definitely Indian and not Arabic. I found this kind of strange, but I figured she was probably just a school friend. I welcomed them into the house, and they looked around. As the agent and the guests made their way upstairs, the little girl who appeared to be Indian stared at me as her hand trailed along the banister. Then I went to go unlock the other home on the property, where my uncle stayed with his family. Right behind me were the two little girls. They rushed into the house and made their way into my cousin's bedroom. The Indian girl was sitting on the bed, petting the cat who was fast asleep, and the other girl was looking around at some toys in the room. I told the girl on the bed that the cat usually doesn't really like people touching her and that she's lucky. The girl just smiled at me. Finally, the parent and the agent arrived at the flat on the property where we were, so I stepped outside to give them some space. Once they had finished, they thanked me, and the agent, the mother, and the lighter-skinned girl, who I had assumed was her daughter, had stepped outside. I paused for a moment, and eventually asked the real estate agent if she could please call the other girl to come outside so that I could lock up. The mother and the agent looked at me, puzzled. "What other girl?" they asked. The mom said, "I only brought my daughter." I laughed at them and told them that I don't really have time to joke around because I really did need to study for my final exams. Their faces fell. I could now see that they were not kidding. I rushed into my cousin's bedroom, only to find it empty, apart from the cat still sound asleep on the bed. I tried to compose myself as I said goodbye to the real estate agent and the prospective buyer. After they left, I asked the housekeeper if she had seen who got out of the car. She responded that it was just two women and a little girl. I know that I did not imagine this, because I clearly saw her. She had thick black hair cut into a bob, and she had a blue Alice band. The way she smiled at me. This experience still haunts me to this day. I don't know if it was an apparition that followed the little girl from school, and maybe knew that I also attended that school. Maybe that's why she showed herself to me. I really don't know. I have never come up with a good explanation for what that was. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ital, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single bedroom all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues, other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm awoken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet toward the end of the bed by my ankles. At first, I thought somebody had broken into my room, because when I turned toward what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness. It was like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped on the light, only for nothing to be there. The window was locked from the inside, and there was nobody in the closet or the bathroom. My room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night, scared, playing games on my DS. The next morning we're at breakfast, and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room. But when she turned on the light, there was nobody there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I never got to experience anything after that, but it still freaks me out to this day.